shadows of Eden, the enigma of Lilith, the ancient texts whisper of a woman. Adam's equal, not his subordinate. Her name echoes through millennia of theological debate and cultural mythology. A single, obscure biblical reference has spawned centuries of speculation about this mysterious figure, who, according to some traditions, fled the Garden of Eden rather than submit to Adam's dominance. Her story challenges us to reconsider fundamental questions about gender, power, and the very nature of creation itself. For in the shadows, between the lines of Genesis, lies a narrative that still resonates with profound implications for how we understand the divine feminine in biblical tradition. The dual creation. Genesis contradictory accounts. The book of Genesis presents us with a peculiar contradiction. Its opening chapters contain not one, but two distinct accounts of humanity's creation, each with dramatically different implications for the relationship between man and woman. In the first creation narrative, Genesis 1:27 declares with striking clarity, "So God created mankind in his own image, in the image of God he created them. Male and female, he created them." This passage suggests a simultaneous creation, with both sexes formed equally in divine likeness. No hierarchy is established, no order of precedence given. Man and woman emerge together, both bearing the full imprint of their Creator's image. Yet, the second creation account in Genesis 2 tells a markedly different story. Here, Adam is formed first from the dust of the earth. Finding him alone, God declares, "It is not good for the man to be alone." God declares, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Genesis 2:18. After bringing forth animals as potential companions, none of whom prove suitable, God causes Adam to fall into a deep sleep, takes one of the man's ribs, and fashions from it a woman whom Adam names Eve. Professor Rachel Elior of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem stands before her crowded lecture hall, her fingers tracing these contradictory passages. "What are we to make of this discrepancy?" she asks her students. Why would the sacred text provide us with two markedly different accounts of humanity's origins? The tension between these narratives has led some ancient Jewish scholars to a startling conclusion. Perhaps they describe two different women. If the first account depicts the creation of an equal female counterpart to Adam, and the second details the formation of Eve from Adam's side, what happened to that first woman? This interpretive gap gave birth to the legend of Lilith, Adam's first wife, created not from his body, but from the same earth as him, claiming equality rather than subordination. Lilith in biblical shadow, despite her prominence in later Jewish folklore, Lilith appears by name only once in the canonical Hebrew Bible. Isaiah 34:14, describing the desolation of Edom, mentions among the wild creatures that will inhabit the ruined land a Lilith, or night creature in some translations. The Hebrew term suggests a nocturnal being, perhaps a screech owl or night demon, finding rest in the devastation of divine judgment. This sparse biblical reference gave little foundation for the elaborate mythology that would later surround her. Yet the seed was planted, and in the fertile soil of ancient Near Eastern mythology, it would grow into a complex figure that transcended cultural boundaries. Biblical scholar Dr. Daniel Solomon notes, "The Bible's silence about Lilith is itself significant. Scripture often leaves deliberate gaps that invite reflection and interpretation. The absence of detail creates space for the imagination to work, sometimes in directions the biblical authors never intended." From Mesopotamian roots to Jewish lore, Lilith's origins stretch far beyond biblical tradition into the ancient mythologies of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian clay tablets from as early as 2400 BCE contain references to female demons known as Lilith, winged nocturnal spirits associated with storms, disease, and sexual temptation. One Sumerian relief depicts a nude woman with bird's feet and wings, flanked by owls, possibly an early representation of this demonic figure. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest written stories, a character resembling Lilith appears. The epic describes a hulapu tree in which three beings make their home: a snake in its roots, the anzu bird in its branches, and a mysterious female figure called Kai in its trunk. When the hero Gilgamesh cuts down the tree, this female entity flees to the wild, uninhabited places. This motif of a feminine presence associated with wilderness and flight would later become central to the Lilith legend. Professor Thomas Blackwood of Cambridge University explains the cultural transmission. Ideas don't respect geographical or religious boundaries. As the ancient Israelites interacted with Mesopotamian cultures during the Babylonian exile, certain mythological elements were inevitably exchanged, reinterpreted, and incorporated into Jewish thought. By the early medieval period, the figure of Lilith had been thoroughly assimilated into Jewish folklore. The 8th-10th century text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira contains the first detailed narrative of Lilith as Adam's first wife. According to this account, Lilith was created from the earth simultaneously with Adam, when he insisted she lie beneath him during sexual intercourse, a position she interpreted as subordination. She refused, uttering God's ineffable name, and fled the Garden of Eden. Please, Lilith, Adam is said to have pleaded, return to me, to our garden, to the life we were meant to share. I will not be beneath you, she replied. We were created equal, and as equals we shall remain. If not together, then apart. 3 angels, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Semengeloff, were sent to retrieve her, finding her by the Red Sea, a region already teeming with demons. When she refused to return, they threatened to kill 100 of her demon children each day. In response, Lilith swore that she would not harm any infant protected by amulets bearing the names of these 3 angels. The Dark Mother. Lilith's evolution. As centuries passed, Lilith's character evolved across multiple cultural and religious contexts. In medieval Jewish mysticism, particularly in the Kabbalah, Lilith gained new dimensions of meaning. The Zohar, Judaism's primary mystical text, portrays her as the demonic first wife of Adam, who after her rebellion became the consort of Samael, Satan, and the mother of demons. Kabbalistic scholar Rabbi Aaron Levi describes this transformation. In mystical thought, Lilith became a symbol of the dangers of unrestrained feminine power. She represented everything that the ordered patriarchal society feared: sexual autonomy, refusal to procreate on man's terms, and rebellion against divine authority. Christian demonology absorbed aspects of the Lilith myth during the medieval and Renaissance periods. She became associated with succubi, female demons who seduce men in their sleep, and was sometimes identified as the serpent who tempted Eve in the garden. Artistic depictions from this era often show her as a beautiful but dangerous temptress, sometimes with serpentine or demonic features. In Islamic tradition, parallels to Lilith appear in the figure of Qarina, a female jinn who steals infants and threatens pregnant women. Though not directly identified with Adam's first wife, these demonic female figures share many characteristics with the Jewish Lilith, suggesting a common mythological ancestry. What fascinates me, observes Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a comparative religion specialist, is how consistently Lilith-like figures appear across cultures that interact with the Middle Eastern religious traditions. From the Greek Lamia to the Babylonian Lamastu, to the Arabic Karina, we find female demons who threaten children, seduce men, and refuse domestication. This suggests something about cultural anxieties regarding female power that transcends specific religious boundaries. Beyond demonization, reclaiming Lilith, while traditional interpretations cast Lilith primarily as a demoness and threat, some modern scholars and religious thinkers have begun to reimagine her significance. Feminist interpretations particularly have found in Lilith a powerful symbol of female autonomy and resistance to patriarchal authority. Consider the radical nature of her alleged sin, argues Dr. Sarah Greenblatt, feminist theologian. She did not, like Eve, disobey God directly. Rather, she refused to accept a hierarchy between herself and Adam that wasn't established by divine decree. If both were created from the earth, why should one rule over the other? This perspective sees Lilith not as a cautionary tale of female rebellion, but as an empowering symbol of equality and self-determination. Her willingness to leave Eden rather than compromise her dignity represents a profound choice of freedom over comfort, autonomy over security. Professor Michael Chen offers a psychological interpretation. The Lilith myth explores the shadow aspects of femininity that patriarchal religions often attempt to suppress. Rather than seeing her as simply evil, we might understand her as representing aspects of the feminine that escape the constraints of conventional religious thinking. In some modern Jewish feminist rituals, Lilith has been reclaimed as a symbol of independence and strength. Some even include her in alternative Seder ceremonies or prayers that honor the divine feminine alongside the more traditional patriarchal imagery. The mythological landscape, Lilith across cultures, Lilith's journey through world mythology reveals fascinating patterns of cultural exchange and transformation. From the Sumerian Lilitu to the Akkadian Ardat Lili, from Greek Lamiae to Germanic night hags, female night spirits share remarkable similarities. In Babylonian demonology, Lilith-like figures were blamed for infant mortality and complications in childbirth. Clay bowls, inscribed with spells against Lilith, have been uncovered throughout the Middle East, some dating back to the 6th century BCE. These incantation bowls often depict her as a wild-haired woman bound in chains, accompanied by protective angels or divine names. Professor Alexander Collins, an archaeologist specializing in ancient Near Eastern artifacts, describes his most significant find. We uncovered a remarkably preserved incantation bowl in the ruins of a family dwelling near Nippur. Inside the bowl, spiraling text in Aramaic invokes protection against Lilith, the strangler of children and seducer of men. The text commands her to flee the household, binding her with divine names and angelic powers. Such protective measures against Lilith pervaded daily life in various ancient cultures. Amulets to ward off her influence were commonly placed in the rooms of pregnant women and newborns. Some Jewish communities continued this practice well into the 20th century, hanging protective charms inscribed with the names Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Semengeloff above children's beds. The persistence of these practices suggests that Lilith represented deep-seated cultural anxieties about mortality, sexuality, and the perceived dangers of uncontrolled femininity. Yet her continued presence in human imagination also speaks to her power as a symbol of that which cannot be fully suppressed or contained. The shadow in the garden, theological implications beyond her cultural significance. Lilith raises profound theological questions. If we entertain the possibility of her existence, even as a mythological construct, What might it tell us about divine intention for gender relations? The dual creation accounts in Genesis have always posed interpretive challenges, explains Reverend Thomas Harrington, comparative theologian. If we read them as complementary rather than contradictory, perhaps they speak to different aspects of human nature and divine purpose. Some interpreters suggest that the first creation account describes humanity's spiritual essence, created equally in divine image, while the second details the physical formation of human bodies and social structures. Others propose that the two accounts represent competing theological traditions that were ultimately preserved side by side in the canonical text. Rabbi Elizabeth Cohen offers another perspective. Perhaps the gap between these narratives intentionally creates space for human interpretation and growth. The tension between equality and hierarchy remains unresolved in the text because it remains unresolved in human experience. We are still working out what it means to be created, equal yet different. The Lilith legend, whatever its origins, serves as a kind of theological shadow text, a narrative that explores possibilities and questions left unaddressed in the canonical account. By imagining an alternative to Eve's creation and role, it invites reflection on fundamental questions of divine intention, human relationship, and the meaning of gender difference. Living with Lilith, contemporary relevance despite, or perhaps because, her ambiguous status, Lilith continues to fascinate contemporary imagination. Her story resonates with modern questions about gender equality, personal autonomy, and the tension between tradition and liberation. Dr. Jennifer Stein, cultural anthropologist, observes, every generation reinterprets Lilith according to its own concerns and values. In periods where maintaining social order is paramount, she appears as a dangerous demon threatening the family unit. In times of social change and expanding freedoms, she becomes a liberating figure, challenging unjust constraints. For some women, seeking religious language that speaks to their experience, Lilith represents an alluring alternative to more passive feminine archetypes. Her refusal to accept subordination, regardless of the consequences, offers a model of principled resistance to injustice, even when that resistance carries a heavy price. Others find in her story a warning about the dangers of pride and rebellion, seeing her exile from Eden as a cautionary tale about the consequences of rejecting divinely established order. This interpretation emphasizes the isolation and destructive potential that followed her departure from the garden. What makes Lilith so enduringly compelling, suggests Professor David Richardson, mythologist, is precisely her ambiguity. She cannot be reduced to simply hero or villain. Like all powerful mythic figures, she contains multitudes, embodying both warnings and inspirations, dangers and possibilities. Lessons from the shadows. What wisdom might we glean from this enigmatic figure who dwells in the margins of sacred text and the shadows of religious imagination? First, Lilith reminds us that canonical texts often contain unresolved tensions and deliberate silences. The gaps between Genesis 1 and 2 create space for questions about gender equality and divine intention that remain vital today. Rather than smoothing over these tensions, we might view them as invitations to deeper engagement with the complexity of sacred tradition. Second, her story highlights the power of interpretation in shaping religious understanding. The same figure who appears as a dangerous demon in one interpretive tradition becomes a symbol of liberation in another. This reminds us that religious meanings are not fixed, but evolve through ongoing dialogue between text, tradition, and lived experience. Third, Lilith challenges us to consider what we lose when certain voices and perspectives are marginalized. If her rebellion stems from a legitimate claim to equality, her demonization may represent not divine judgment, but human resistance to challenging established power structures. What other voices might we be missing in our religious narrative? Finally, the persistence of Lilith in cultural imagination suggests something essential about human spiritual needs. Perhaps we intuitively recognize the need for religious symbols that speak to the full range of human experience, including resistance, autonomy, and the courage to walk away from unjust situations, even at great personal cost. Questions for reflection as we consider Lilith's complex legacy. Several questions invite deeper exploration. What might the two creation accounts in Genesis reveal about different understandings of gender and equality in ancient Israel? How does the evolution of Lilith's character across cultures reflect changing attitudes toward female power and autonomy? If we take seriously the possibility that Lilith represents Adam's first wife, how might this change our understanding of Eve's role and the fall narrative? Conclusion. Between shadow and light, Lilith dwells in the spaces between canonical text and interpretive tradition, between demonization and veneration, between the garden and the wilderness. Her ambiguous status makes her not less, but more significant as a religious symbol, capable of holding contradictions that more clearly defined figures cannot accommodate. Whether historical figure, mythological construct, or theological metaphor, Lilith continues to challenge simplistic readings of sacred tradition. She reminds us that our religious stories are more complex and multifaceted than we often acknowledge, containing not just clear moral lessons, but also unresolved questions and countercultural possibilities. As we navigate our own tensions between tradition and innovation, between community expectations and personal authenticity, Lilith offers neither easy answers nor simple moral. Instead, she invites us into the discomfort of the borderlands, where fixed certainties give way to deeper questioning and new possibilities. Perhaps that is her most enduring gift, the courage to ask difficult questions, to challenge assumed hierarchies, and to venture beyond the garden walls when conscience demands it, even into the wilderness of the unknown. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of one of the Bible's most enigmatic and controversial figures. We hoped this journey through the shadows of Eden has provided food for thought and sparked your curiosity about the complexities of sacred tradition. What aspects of Lilith's story resonated most with you? Do you see her primarily as a cautionary tale or an empowering symbol? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciated this deep dive into biblical mythology, please subscribe to our Deep Bible Stories channel for more thought-provoking content that explores the rich complexity of sacred narratives. Your support helps us continue bringing these ancient stories to life in all their challenging, inspiring dimensions.